It's Ross Pollard and his bare facts. So bad, so bad. It's Ross Pollard with the bare facts.
Morning, guys. Welcome back to the Bare Facts. I'm not sure how many of you have ever seen a helicopter pilot perform his craft up close, but it's quite impressive. The dexterity and the concentration that's required is quite impressive. And that's just in a non-wartime mode. How someone actually navigates one of these when they're under fire is quite impressive. I have here with me today a gentleman by the name of Jason Duggan, or Jigga, as his friends call him. He's a very interesting person. He's also annoyingly humble, so we're going to have to drag some of this out of him. But I think it will be I know it will be a very interesting chat today. Jigga, welcome to the Bare Facts.
Thank you, Roscoe.
Let's go back. Where did you grow up?
I'm a Bitzer, so I grew up in a lot of different places. My dad worked on the rigs. My mum used to work for the airlines. So I was actually born in Singapore to Australian parents.
An international child?
An international child, yes. Lived in Singapore for a brief time, then Jakarta back in the day, and then into the Middle East. My sister was born in Tehran.
Tehran?
Yeah. And then moved to Scotland where I started primary school, and then eventually came back to Australia when I was about 8, 9 years old. Lived in Perth for a while, then to Melbourne.
So did you attend international schools?
No, I went to a Scottish primary school, not an international school as such, and through Asia I was too young to go to school at that point, so straight schooling in the country where I happened to be located at the time.
When did your parents settle back into Australia?
Came back to Australia when I was about 9, and not long after that my parents got divorced. My dad went back over to Southeast Asia and lived there for the next 20-odd years. My mum and my sister and I moved to Melbourne and stayed here for a number of years until she got remarried, and then ended up going to Karratha in northwestern Australia for a while, then back to Melbourne where I finished high school, and then onwards from there.
What age did you go into the military?
I'd finished 2 years at uni, so I think I was about 19. They wrote a song about
19 when you went into the military. Was that just in infantry, just general intake?
No, I joined actually to be, well, I always wanted to fly, but I guess I wanted a backup plan. Had a pretty high failure rate back in the day, sort of at best 50% pass rate, failure rate, whichever way, glass is half full or empty. And I guess I thought wasn't the type of person who thought it was a guarantee that I'd be successful, so I wanted a follow-up option. So I started civil engineering at uni and then joined the army with the aim of being a pilot, but with no guarantee. So I did all the basic training. I went to the Defence Academy to finish my degree, and then various different things happened, and promises weren't kept. It looked like it was going to take me 6 years to do a 4-year degree, which I wasn't really planning on. So I changed tack and had to focus on putting it all into being a pilot. So I finished just a Bachelor of Science, then went to Duntroon, where you do all your basic officer training for 18 months, 12 months that I did there, and fingers crossed to get into aviation at the end of it. And I was lucky enough to get selected to go on pilot training.
Jigga, what was the application process to become a helicopter pilot within the military?
So first, because I joined the Army, first and foremost, the way I entered, which was just to be an Army officer. So I jumped through the panel, jumped through the psychometric testing, interviews and whatever else. And I guess at that time, didn't sort of find it too difficult. I was a year or two older than a lot of the guys that were applying, or guys and girls coming straight out of school where I'd been out and been to uni for a while, worked and lived by myself with some other uni classmates. So I guess I had a few other life experiences that some of the other people didn't have the benefit at that stage. So I didn't find it too difficult. And then, found myself all signed up with a crew cut and off you go.
Straight into a helicopter, or do you have to do planes first?
Once I finished all my officer training, and then when you start pilot's course, flew planes for 6 months and passed that part of the course.
What sort of planes were you flying?
Little plane, it's called a CT4. It's a little single-engine plane, side-by-side or twin-seater. So learn all our basic flying skills, navigation. Then when we got into instrument flying, they put us in an aircraft called a Tobago, a TB-10. I'm not much of an aerosexual, especially when it comes to light planes, so that's the names they told me, and I'll take their word for it.
Yeah.
It was a means to an end. I didn't really have any great desire to fly planes any longer than I had to.
So what sort of helicopter did you start in when you're getting instructed?
Yeah, first helicopter I flew was the Squirrel.
Yeah.
And we did that for a while. Then, unfortunately, one of my classmates had a crash with an instructor, and they broke the helicopters. And then they were grounded for a long-term engineering inquiry. There's some bit of consternation between the manufacturer and the defence as to why the items have failed. So our course got put on hold for a while, which meant that we got to do things like, whitewater rafting and adventure training to fill in our time and broaden our horizons, give us a little break from what was going on. And then I moved on to the Kiowa, or the Bell 206 Jet Ranger.
Which is, I suppose, for the listeners, sort of that traditional-looking Army helicopter, isn't it? The Huey?
No, it's the smaller version of the Huey. So I used to describe it as the Channel 7 helicopter that you see flying around. Yeah. Similar to that, or similar size to that, depending on what state you live in and what period of time you're looking at. But a small little single-engine helicopter, and loved it. So it was kind of, I feel fortunate. Fun? Yeah, lots of that. That was where we sort of learnt the basics of the craft of being an army pilot. So a lot of low-level flying, a lot of low-level navigation in and around the trees at 10 feet.
Wow.
And, it was awesome. Loved it.
How hard is it to get hang of the dexterity? Because you've got two pedals, haven't you? But you've also got the collective and what?
Cyclic.
The cyclic.
Yeah, so it's like, you think, is it difficult? Can you rub your tummy and pat your head? Well, that's not flying a helicopter. It's not riding a bike either. It's just a learned skill.
Yeah.
When I first started flying a helicopter in particular, I was amazed at the little amount of movement that was required to have a pretty good big change in the aircraft's position when you're hovering, for example. They're very small movements you don't necessarily think. But
so you're not yanking stuff around?
No, not at all.
Yep.
And, I was when I started. And almost ended up in a crash magazine or two, I'm sure, as did many other initial helicopter pilots. But once you sort of settle down and follow the instruction you're given, it's a pretty finite and small movements to achieve it to what it is you need in most occasions.
So let's add another layer of difficulty. When did they introduce you flying with night vision goggles on?
Towards the latter stages of our pilot's course, part of the criteria was to pass a night vision goggle training before we get our wings. So
that gives you vision in the dark, obviously.
Yeah.
Hence the term. But what's your field of vision's not great, is it?
No, so the NVGs offer you about 40-degree field of view, which is like if you imagine looking through a toilet roll. It's about that sort of amount of a field of view, plus the I've had it described as so you're nearly legally blind with the amount of visual acuity you get through the older generation NVGs in particular. Things have improved with technology, but having said that, it's a lot better than looking at the blackness and imagining where you are. It at least gives you a pretty good perception of what's around you, looking at two little green TV screens.
Huge vibration. The aircraft are not pressurised. Lots of noise. You're wearing a flame retardant flight suit. You've got a helmet on, and then add the NVGs. How tiring is it on these exercises?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you want to learn how to be extraordinary and achieve high success and a winning mindset, comment on this episode, Ice Bath, at the Bearfax Podcast on YouTube or at the Bearfax Podcast on Instagram, and I'll give you instant access to my latest ebook, The Top 10 Benefits of Ice Baths for Extraordinary Results. Tip 5 is my personal favourite. Let me know what your top tip is.
It can get fairly fatiguing, depending on the style and type of flying you're doing. But, the lower you are and the closer you are to things that are going to hurt you if you hit them, then you obviously need to be a lot more attentive. So the mental drain and the eye strain can get fairly fatiguing, especially when you're learning to do it and the early stages until you, I guess, get match fit, and then you get more and more used to it as time goes by.
And you're obviously having to move your head around a lot more too because of the reduced vision.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the key components to being able to fly on MVGs, I'd say successfully, is moving your head from side to side or up and down as required to give your brain all the information it needs to maintain that situational awareness.
How many hours did you have to get up, both daytime flying and nighttime flying, for you to become proficient and qualified?
I actually don't remember, Roscoe, to be honest. I just was one flight at a time and just trying to keep my job, to be honest. So we flew planes for about 6 months. The basic helicopter course was 6 months. And then our operational conversion was another 6 months, give or take, depending on what helicopter you're flying. So let's say 100 hours on fixed wing, 100 hours on the initial course, and then another 75 on our operational conversion.
Yep.
And then that just gives you a license to learn, really. They send you off to a unit as a DCAT pilot with all the skills to get you there, and then you learn your job.
And what aircraft did you progress to? Sorry, what helicopter did you progress
I was lucky
to?
enough. I stayed on the Kiowa for a number of years afterwards, not necessarily because of the aircraft, although it was a great little machine. I loved it over time. There's a lot shinier toys in the inventory, but they were doing jobs at the time that I wasn't that interested in. So Black Hawks and the Hueys, I would have liked to fly a Huey gunship, but I didn't really want to fly a Huey straight up. I wanted to do the reconnaissance role, which I was lucky enough to get chosen to do, and did that for a number of years before I went on to instructing.
Yep. And was that was the main aircraft that you stayed on during the military?
No, so I flew Kiowas for probably 6-7 years, and I was lucky enough to be based in Darwin for most of it, although that was where my belongings laid. I didn't spend too much at home. I travelled fairly extensively throughout Australia, New Guinea. The latter stages of that is when we had the Peace Monitoring Group in Bougainville, so I did a tour over there in a ground job, and then straight home from that I went over to Timor, flying Kiowas at that point for 4 or 5 months.
Did you move to another aircraft?
I did. After that sort of stint, I was lucky enough to do an instructor exchange in America, where I was there for 18 months teaching American pilots how to fly. Came home, and then a couple of years after instructing in Australia, I was lucky enough to get transition on the Chinook.
So tell us about the Chinooks. I'm sure people have seen them and know about them. They're a pretty impressive machine, aren't they?
Yeah, still my favourite helicopter. It looks fairly ungainly, and you wonder why and how it should fly, but it does it, and it does it pretty well. Very, very capable machine, despite its appearance. So
how does it differ from a normal helicopter?
So unlike most helicopters that people will have seen with a main rotor and a tail rotor, the Chinook's got 2 main rotors and no tail rotor. So it looks like 2 little intermeshing rotor blades carrying a big bus that flies around the sky.
And what sort of cruising speed does it do, and is it quite manoeuvrable?
Surprisingly so. So it's actually one of the fastest helicopters around, with a V&E of 170 knots, so close enough to 300 kilometres an hour, which is pretty quick for a helicopter. and surprisingly manoeuvrable, especially at lighter weights.
Two pilots?
Yes, two pilots, and operationally we crew of 5, so 2 door gunners and a ramp gunner who was also an aircraft engineer.
Okay. So in the military, what are these aircraft used for?
Troop movement and support, so it can carry 30 soldiers easily. We have carried a lot more when necessity on operations. Also has 3 cargo hooks, so it can take 3 different underslung loads or up to one of the few helicopters that will actually lift its weight in the right configuration.
And what's its weight?
25,000 pounds for the Chinook itself, and then it'll lift another 25.
So what's that in tonne?
Oh, Roscoe.
A lot.
18 tonne.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
all up. Wow. That's everything.
So you were deployed to Afghanistan?
Yeah, I did 2 tours of Afghanistan.
What years were they?
2006 into 2007, then again in 2008.
And
so I've nearly got my citizenship over there.
How did you find it over there?
I don't like to use the word enjoyed it, but I did, and I enjoyed it for a number of reasons. The camaraderie of working with a really great team of people was the highlight of my time in the Defence Force. One of the few occasions where you could actually quantifiably make a difference, and I say that in the sense of it might have been moving people from A to B, or moving equipment or stores to support the people on the ground, or to a degree the locals. You could actually quantifiably see it, whereas a lot of the time I'd spent previous to that, especially in reconnaissance, it was not necessarily that physical reward at the end of a day's work. It did different things, but
you're doing what you trained for, yes?
That's right, yeah. So I like the challenge of it.
Were you scared?
Yeah, at times, but kind of didn't focus too much on the negative side of that. You could probably get weighed down by the fear of what could be, but I sort of used to, and I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it, to be fair, until afterwards, but I used to think about it as a challenge every day. It's like a game. You've got to beat your opposition so they don't get to beat you. It's as simple as I try to make it, being a simple person I am.
So keeping focus, because you are being shot at.
Occasionally, yeah. Look, it's ideally you're not getting it, and you position yourself in a way where you remove the likelihood or minimise the likelihood of putting yourself in that position. That's part of the game to start with at times, and only a few times for myself. But there was people shooting in and around us and otherwise. But yeah, as I said, fortunately few and far between. It wasn't a daily occurrence by any stretch for what we were doing.
When you were transporting soldiers, were you transporting them into areas where you were under fire?
Well, potentially, yeah. So for some of the jobs that we did, then that was a distinct possibility. When you're going into an unknown and an unsecure area, then generally, with people that may or may not want you to be around and have their own ways of demonstrating, not always with a placard saying "go home," and so there was always that heightened level of attention, I'll call it. I never got in the aircraft thinking it was my last day, and was never so arrogant to think that I was beyond it either. So you always had a level of respect for the situation, and also as part of a larger team. It wasn't just the aircraft, it was people in the back, people on the ground. So as I said, I focused on the task at hand and not necessarily focusing on the what ifs or what could be.
Is that not the demise, but is that the conclusion of your career if you're too preoccupied with what could happen to you or the environments that you're going into?
I think it could be, yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's a distractor, and it takes away your mental capacity to deal with everything that's unfolding in front of you if you're too distracted by that. Now, some people don't have that control. You sort of can't switch it on or off, or something. And I'm not saying I could, but that's how I seem to get through it. Other people focused differently to the way I feel I was, and potentially did get to the stage where it's like, no, I don't think I want to do this anymore, and completely fair response.
Yeah. So can you tell me about the award you received for your service?
I was fortunate enough to be given an individual award, but I think it was really an award that I received on behalf of the whole unit while we were in Afghanistan the first time around. I was lucky enough to be given a United States Bronze Star Award. Which
is, correct me if I'm wrong, are you one of the only Australian pilots to have ever received that?
One of a few, yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's not that many of us that have it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as I said, fairly privileged to receive that.
So you're using words like privileged and lucky. Again, we're going to have to get you to put your humility and your modest card down. Why were you awarded that?
It wasn't for a one-off action. It was for, I guess, a sustained performance. I was lucky enough to be the officer commanding of the unit over there, so we became a very fundamental part of the US task force that we were attached to from 101st Airborne. And I guess we did a lot of missions with those guys in support of special operations and other things like that, which I guess gained the respect of their commanders.
Sorry to interrupt, but you're flying people in and out of dangerous situations, aren't you? Yes.
Yeah, that happens. Yes.
Yeah. This modesty is really it's really killing things here, Jigga.
I know.
So you're dealing with special forces and you're flying a huge effing helicopter in and out.
Yeah.
In a hostile environment, and you're then being recognised by the American military.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's correct.
In some of these missions, when you then land the aircraft, can you see where you've been shot at? Have you seen damage to the aircraft where you've been shot at?
I was really lucky my whole time over there where I never actually got shot.
Right.
Shots into our aircraft. There were aircraft in our formations that did get shot. And sometimes they're evident when you're flying, sometimes they're not until you get back, and guys could see some damage in the panels and otherwise, and sometimes you can hear the noise in and around you with shots from the ground, but not necessarily hitting the aircraft or you.
How hard is it to do this at night when you've got NVGs on and flying into areas? I'm imagining that's taking it up to a whole nother level again.
One of the biggest threats in Afghanistan was the terrain itself. So it was, unlike most of Australia where you've got a large proportion of the population that's got lights on and everything else, it's not necessarily, there's lots expanses of darkness. So, and the terrain's fairly, where we were operating was fairly devoid of vegetation, so there's not a lot of information for your eyes to receive.
Oh, that's quite important, is it?
Yeah, it gives you that texture. So if you can, if you were to see a tree or large rocks or buildings, it gives you context as to what you're flying over. It might be the height of how high you are, might be what information on what the ground is doing, etc., etc. But over sand and dirt and whatever else, it's fairly sort of uneventful in many cases. It makes it difficult to maintain or understand your height without use of things like radar altimeters and other bits and pieces. So it can be hard, but along with that, the dust in Afghanistan was unforgiving and unrelenting. So whenever you were trying to land and take off, we would routinely not be able to see the ground for the last portion of our arrival, and the first quite a number of seconds on departure, you sort of set yourself up for success before you lose your visual reference, and hope that you've done it right when you arrive on the ground and the same when you leave.
So if you're on approach, you are guesstimating to a certain level once it starts to, I believe the term's brownout?
Yeah, brownout.
Yeah.
Definitely the case. So yeah, that's it. And we would set ourselves up in profiles which would allow the aircraft to hopefully arrive in the right attitude, right speed when you hit the ground, and then hopefully not move too far once you do hit the ground.
Do you suffer any mental or physical effects from your time in Afghanistan?
No, I honestly think I'm pretty lucky in that regard. As I said, I think from my opinion, maybe I do. Maybe others will think I've got some mental problems, but may or may not be attributed to Afghanistan.
Yeah, okay.
No, I think I'm pretty lucky, mate. As I said, I generally tried to be pretty positive about my time there, what I was doing, and also fairly positive about the threat that we were exposed to. And I also had a level of, there's people that had it worse than me always. So every time we drop off an infantryman or someone like that out into the wild blue yonder, like I was under no illusions as to who had the better job at that point, or the less risk. Or less amount of risk that they were exposed to, and it was always me in that case. The guys and girls who were out on the ground doing their job were far more exposed to threat than I was, that's for sure.
When did you wrap up your time in the military? What year was that?
End of 2008 I finished up. So I was, once again, had a pretty fortunate career. So right place, right time, but also think, I put in as much as I got out of my time. So I did 16 and a half years by the end of it. I'd finished up as the OC of the squadron, officer commanding the squadron, and had 2 young kids at that point, and I sort of got to a juncture where I like working with people, I like the flying. The road from that point on was probably a lot more desk-bound than I particularly thought I wanted to do, and still flying today. So I guess I may have chosen the right course at that point. But I was also fairly sure that I'd seen the best part of my career. I don't think it was going to get better. I was lucky enough and fortunate enough to work with some amazing people, do some amazing work over the 2 tours in Afghanistan, but my time in C Squadron. So it seemed like a pretty good time to look to something else.
Before we go to that, can you give me one example of a close call that you had when you were deployed in Afghanistan?
Funnily enough, the closest call was a large mission we did probably towards the end of my second tour. We're doing a lot of work with the Special Forces and going into a region that hadn't had any coalition forces in at all, or if at all, not for a significant amount of time. So it was fairly uncertain mission, I guess, in many ways, and we had to modify it on numerous occasions because of intelligence indicating that probably wasn't as secure an option as it could have been at different times. So that was probably the setup for a job that could have gone either way. And we had a large aviation force. I can't remember the exact numbers, but say half a dozen Chinooks. 2 Chinooks, probably 4 or 5 Black Hawks, handful of Apaches, and UAVs overhead and gunships and other bits and pieces. So it was a fairly well supported mission, but that also indicates, I guess, the level of risk that could have been on it. We're flying well up to the north of where we'd been operating prior to that. And we were in the lead aircraft, myself and another mate of mine. And as we were arriving to the objective, right beside a compound, so it was an assault onto an objective, or as close as we could get in a helicopter. So at some early hour of the morning when people shouldn't be up and about, and on the latter stage of approach, you can see people moving around, and that sort of gets you an extra level of attention to what you're about to do, because it's not normal for people to be moving around at that sort of area.
They're not leaving a barbecue or leaving.
I wouldn't have thought so. No, it was. It definitely wasn't too many cans of beer lying on the ground or otherwise, no bonfire that people were celebrating around. Anyway, the insertion went as we arrived. There's a few people sort of scattering around. We arrived in a big ball of dust, and all of our guys jumped out and did what they needed to do. As we were departing, there was a massive explosion set off behind us, and it's one of the moments that sort of etched in my memory where I was taking off and there was a large mountain range right to our front at that point. The explosion that occurred was large enough to put a shadow of the Chinook like a movie cinema on this mountain range. It was a number of k's away. So
you were part of a large projector.
Yeah, exactly. So that was sort of fairly interesting. And then having to go back there a number of hours later, we were unsure as to what was going to greet us, but it was fortunate. Once again, we're sort of lucky enough to...
What was the explosion? Was that an explosion of someone firing upon you guys from behind?
No, fortunately it was a combination of some explosives that were laid by our guys, as well as some contact with people on the ground that didn't want us to be there. So I never got to the bottom of exactly what caused this to occur, but it was pretty interesting and gained all of our attention, that's for sure.
Were you on NVGs at the time as well?
Yeah.
So did that momentarily stuff your vision up at all?
No, fortunately, in this case, the explosion was from behind us, and the NVGs do their job. They sort of have an automatic brightness control, so they sort of almost bleach out, blank out for a brief moment, and then they're working again.
So it's not like Harrison Ford when he turns the lights on in his house for the terrorists in Patriot games and they all can't see.
Depends what story you want to tell, Roscoe. I couldn't see anything for the next hour. I was flying blindly.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah, exactly. That'll sound more interesting.
So you come home, you're driving a desk for a little while. Tell us about the next phase. Where did you go as a pilot?
The next phase, I took some time off to be dad for a little while on long service leave and a whole heap of leave that I'd accrued over the years, and just packed the two kids up in the camper and toured around for a little bit while I used up some of that leave, and then sort of got nervous about needing a job. I applied for Ambulance Victoria job about 2 days too late because I wasn't necessarily looking for a job. I just sort of got to that point where, okay, a lot of my life hasn't necessarily been well planned, Roscoe, and this is another example of just, woke up that day and said, yeah, I think it's time. Let's move on. And so missed out purely on time for the Ambulance Victoria job, but decided to move back to Victoria anyway, and rented a house just out the back of Essendon Airport. So I used to watch the ambulance helicopters and police helicopters flying out of there daily while I was sunning myself and looking after kids. And fortuitously, a spot came up unexpectedly only a couple of months later, right before I was about to start touring up to Darwin to fly there, and snavelled a job with HEMS 5 at the time in Essendon Airport, and that was the start of it, the second stage.
So what sort of flying did you do there, and have you been doing for Air Ambulance Victoria?
Yeah, so as an EMS helicopter pilot operating in and around Victoria initially, flying wherever the phone told us to go to pick up whoever the ambulance told us to go and get by day or by night, wherever it happened to be, in the snow, over the water, at the edge of town if necessary, and have loved it. Like I was saying before, my time in Chinook, where you could physically see the outcome of a day's work, was once again visible to me as part of a crew where we're servicing the community in this case and helping people, not necessarily, not the other side of the army work that does happen as a byproduct. This was tangible, and it was exciting, and it was awesome to be part of a small little team of pilot, crewmen and a mica.
So from the flying side of things, Still okay? Not too beige compared to what you were doing?
No, because the first couple of years I was flying, they took the MVG's office. Well, they didn't take them off. They hadn't actually become part of the civil operation at that point. So I got rid of the green TV screens and flew around the darkness for a couple of years, which that gave us a heightened level of alertness and created another sort of experience, and something that I'm actually feel very fortunate to have gone back and done, because it just refined your piloting skills, especially by night. And I'm lucky I had a reasonable grounding when I started learning how to fly, and then didn't do a lot of that sort of flying until I got back to ambulance, and then from there, night sun approaches into a hole in the trees or wherever it is, an accident site somewhere it got your adrenaline running for a certain period of time, definitely.
Have you found any of the scenes confronting with patients, and so shutting down and then you're at the scene while stuff happens before you can leave?
Yeah. Yes, because it's, as you've seen and lived for a lot longer than I have, you see certain parts of it. Like I said about Afghanistan and being in sort of war-torn areas, my focus is more of a positive, not the negative of what you see. There's a few scenes definitely where you see people deceased and otherwise that you don't want to see, and especially when you know the context of how they've arrived at that position, and they've got survivors, part of the family and otherwise. But I think generally maintain the positive outlook of, okay, well, let's help the people that we can and deal with the other side of it at a later stage. But never been too drawn down, I don't think, by the crap and corruption that comes with some of the jobs.
You said that you really enjoy the flying with HEMS and Air Ambulance Victoria. Just what is it that you really enjoy? You said it's part of the crew. What else do you enjoy?
Yeah, look, because I've been flying for quite a while, and you asked it to become mundane or beige, it didn't, but it's like riding a bike, driving a car. Once you've got that skill and inherent skill, it becomes somewhat second nature. The takeoff and the landing is always, a heightened level of awareness is required, and every scene we go to, is different to the last one. But I really enjoyed getting involved in the medical side of the house. Not directly, obviously, you guys do all that, but almost the micro assistant. Undiagnosed and untreated and untrained, but I got in there and enjoyed that side where I could prepare drugs and other bits and pieces to help the crewman who was helping the paramedic, and I think sometimes I got in the way of everyone a bit too much, and it's like, stop being so enthusiastic, step back. But I don't know, I enjoy that. That variety kept me mentally stimulated as well.
Yeah.
From where to go on a job.
More of a training role now, administrative touring role, is that correct?
Yeah, so started off on the line, then was fortunate enough to get into a check and training position within Victoria primarily at that stage, and then too silly sometimes and too quick to put your hand up or not say no to jobs. So then went on to be the chief pilot for a little while, did that, got some experience at a desk and thought, okay, now I can go back to flying. So went back to the head of training, which I did for a few years, and then was lucky enough to help the transition of Australian helicopters at the time when we took over all of Victoria as providing the helicopters and crews to Ambulance Victoria and bringing in the new 139 helicopter. And then I've been back as the head of training for the last few years for the whole company. So that involves a lot of time on a jet flying between various different places around Australia and sometimes internationally for training, but it keeps me busy and keeps me entertained and enjoy it thoroughly. So I've been, once again, lucky.
Do you still enjoy jumping on the tools occasionally? And
yeah, just the other day, I got just on a day shift, and it's if I get smart enough to put my phone away and stop looking at work emails or stop answering it, just get on and do a job. And so it's good. It just puts you a bit of reality back into it all about and keeps me grounded in the sense of remembering what it is that we're actually doing in my job as a trainer and keeping the guys and girls.
How many hours are you up to now? What does your logbook read as far as days and nights go?
I don't know. I honestly...
Roughly, Mr. Humble?
Only about 6,000 hours, I think.
Okay.
Give or take, and I've got probably 1,500 night NVG hours and whatever else. Yeah. So it's good. It's not a bad book, but I don't actually write a logbook anymore. I just fill in Air Maestro and whatever totals come out. It doesn't matter. I don't need any more hours, and I don't look at it like a CV, if you know what I mean. I've got the qualifications. I've got the hours I need. If I want to work anywhere, then I can pretty well be in a position in that regard. So it's nice to have now.
What do you do in your downtime to switch off?
Got 5 kids. I don't know if I switch off. The downtime, someone argue going to work is the relaxing part of it. So, no, it's got motorbikes, which I love to get on when I can. We've got a boat, which we water ski with. So that is good for the summer months. That's the downside of living in Victoria. It's a very limited season, and I'm not...
The air ambulance jobs haven't discouraged the motorcycle riding or the speedboats yet?
No. Look, if you spent your life worrying about everything, then you wouldn't do anything, would you? So
True.
You can do things half smart, although, some of the things we've done over our time, and you'd be exactly the same, would not be classified as half smart even. So
True.
We're lucky enough to survive those as well.
Jigga, you are someone who has achieved a lot. Your humility and modesty is quite annoying to try and drag what you've actually achieved out. But having said that, I think we have managed to drag a little bit out of you today. Firstly, thanks for joining the Bear Facts. We really appreciate it. And secondly, thank you for your service to your country, but also your service to particularly the Victorian community. We really appreciate it, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks for listening today. We're glad you could join us. For more information on today's episode, previous episodes, and upcoming episodes, please go to @the Podcast on Instagram. Also our YouTube channel, The Bear Facts Podcast with Ross Pollard, as well as Facebook, The Bear Facts. And please get in contact with us. If you are an extraordinary person, you know an extraordinary person, or you've been in an extraordinary situation.